think we'll get started. So on behalf of myself, Nicola, and Owen Stack and Anne-Marie Morrison and Padraig McKeon, I'd like to extend a warm welcome for everyone to attend today. So thank you for joining us. Just to let you know some of the kind of housekeeping, we're going to actually record the masterclass today, but also we'd invite you to chat to us. And I think you're all familiar with the Zoom chat now, and a few of you have already put in some comments. So we'd be delighted to hear any questions that you have. Any questions for Padraig, or just in general, any feedback or comments. So please feel free to chat to us. So just to kind of give you a little bit of an overview of our proceedings today. So Owen and myself are going to just do a couple of hellos and introductions, and particularly to our new program as well on the Learning to Lead in Uncertain Times. And then we're going to hand over to Padraig, and we're really excited about the topic Padraig has to speak about today, because it's very topical in terms of leadership communication and crisis management, and we're looking forward to those insights and knowledge. We'll then do Q&A, so you'll have an opportunity to ask any questions that you may have for Padraig, and then Owen will take over and tell you a little bit more about the program that we have put together, and give you some insights into what the program is about and how you can sign up. So as I said, you're all very welcome, and I hope you're looking forward to this morning as much as we are. So just by way of introductions there, I'm Nicola O'Neill from Harvest, and as part of the partnership with DCU and this program of Learning to Lead in Uncertain Times, I will be one of the program directors. Owen will introduce himself in a moment, but Owen is from the DCU Business School and will also be a program director. And then Padraig McKeon, who this morning will give us some great insights around a very topical topic, but also as part of the tutor panel on the program that we have designed. So we are very excited to talk to you just a little bit now around the collaboration between Harvest and DCU. And look, it's not a surprise, and it hasn't been for many years, that we as leaders and organizations are working in a VUCA context. And I suppose now it's never been so important that our leaders can navigate this VUCA world, but also have the skill sets to really be able to operate effectively in it. So Harvest and DCU Business School partnered this year, and we have designed and developed and are launching this brilliant program, or we think it's brilliant anyway, in terms of learning to lead in an uncertain world. And one of the uniqueness, I think, is not only the content, which Owen will take you through us, but some of the feedback we've got from our own focus groups is the uniqueness of the expert delivery team. So you'll probably see some familiar faces there with Rona Kieran, Padraig himself, with John McMacken, David Collins, Joe Cullinan, and then our own Harvest team, Ailish, Milla, and Eamon. And one, I suppose, of the uniqueness around this program is not only are you getting really good, strong research and thought leadership around the areas of learning to lead and uncertainty, but you're also getting a really strong panel of learning specialists from Harvest, who really will help with the transition and the implementation and the practical element of the learning of the program. And we believe that that's very unique, and it will really enhance the learning experience for the participants. So what I'm going to do is just hand over to Owen to say a quick hello, and then he'll introduce us to Padraig. And as I said, our masterclass will then begin. So Owen, over to you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Nicola, and good morning, everybody. My name is Owen Stack. I'm the Commercial Director at DCU Business School, and that includes having responsibility for our executive education team, as well as a lot of the industry engagement that occurs at DCU Business School. So as Nicola said, we're really delighted to be partnering with Harvest on this new program. We're combining our expertise, experience, and understanding of business to offer what we believe is a unique program designed for leaders like you in the audience, seeking global and up-to-date perspective on leadership and how to lead in an ongoing VUCA world. So Learning to Lead, it's an online first program. So I'll explain a little bit more after Padraig speaks. I'll go into a little bit more detail about the program itself, but it is going to be an online approach first program, given everything that we're experiencing at the moment. And we're looking, like I said, to articulate the key requirements for effective leadership in uncertain and crisis times. We think it importantly that it will highlight the necessity of leadership mindset to extend beyond the immediacy of uncertain times and to imagine a new world of possibilities for leaders in their organization post-uncertainty and post-crisis. It's going to be a unique blend of renowned academic tutors from the business school that Nicola just mentioned, as well as linking in with the learning specialists, the industry leading learning specialists from Harvest, So we've teamed together to create the program that's going to focus on the most up-to-date research-based content, as well as linking in with experiential sessions, ensuring the ease of application and implementation of the knowledge and the skills that are being acquired on the program. So to give you a slice of what that will include, we're delighted to introduce one of the tutors from our program today, Padraig McKeon. Padraig is a specialist advisor on external and internal communications, stakeholder relations, media relations, and digital media, with over 30 years experience of strategy formulation and delivery across a range of business sectors in Ireland and overseas. Padraig is a graduate of communication studies from DCU back in the mid-1980s. After that, he worked for 25 years with two of Ireland's most prestigious communications firms, Murray Consultants and Drury Communications. His time at Drury include a 6.5-year term as managing director of that business, and during that time, he led the team of 30 people. But since 2013, he's been working as an independent consultant while also holding a number of non-executive directorships across commercial and non-profit boards. He also lectures on 2 master's level programs here in DCU, including a module on crisis communications management on our master's program in emergency management in the business school. Padraig has worked with businesses of all shapes and sizes, entrepreneurs, family firms, publicly quoted, transnational, and across a real array of sectors, including food, hospitality, manufacturing, retail, logistics, property, professional services, and entertainment. He's extensive experience of internal change management, corporate transactions, crisis and issue management, market profile building, and reputation management. In addition to all of those executive roles, Padraig has been a non-executive director of a number of commercial and non-profit organizations, including being a director of the Forum on Public Procurement. And here in DCU, he's a trustee of DCU's Educational Trust and a member of the governing authority. And after his initial degree with DCU, Padraig also holds qualifications in accounting, project management, innovation management, company direction, and digital marketing. He's also a QQI certified trainer. He's a fellow of the Public Relations Institute of Ireland and has been granted chartered practitioner status by the Chartered Institute of Public Relations in the UK. So a real mouthful there for me, just to introduce Padraig. He's eminently qualified, as you'll have heard. We're thrilled to have Padraig on the programme, and we're delighted that he's with us today to give you a slice of some of the expertise that he will be exploring with participants on our new programme. So with that, Padraig, I'd like to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Owen. I didn't actually realise that I was going to get the extended bio, but thank you very much. But it allowed me time to get off mute because I was stuck somewhere in mute land. So it doesn't matter how qualified you are these days. If you can't use the Zoom buttons, you're ultimately not able to contribute. Thank you for the introduction, and I'm delighted to join you all here today and talk a little bit about the whole area of communication and leadership. And what I'm going to cover really is just 3 topics or 3 elements of this topic over the next 25 minutes or so, if we can just get them to move on there. So we're going to first look at the role of communication within the leadership dynamic. Then I'm going to look at 2 key elements of the developing a good base for communications on the part of leaders, the concept of the stakeholder and the importance of listening. And then I'm going to go on to look at how that might be discharged in difficult times, and in particular how a framework for approaching the analysis of and the response to a crisis situation. So when you look at leadership communication, it's one of the features of moving from an operational or a line management role into a role of leadership is that communication is a huge part of the leadership agenda. So ultimately, as I say, the difference between a line management function and the other function, that leadership is a huge part of it, communication is a huge part of it. And not only is it a case that communication is part of like what would be the textbook definition of leadership, but also those who you are leading are also expecting communication from their leaders. They're expecting direction, and that's a critical part of it. Now, if you ask me to explain in layperson's terms what I understand communication to be in an organization, I remind people that every organization has a whole range of moving parts, a whole number of things that are critical to its operations. And some of the communication between them is functional, some of the operations are functional, but the role of communication generally is like oil in a machine. It's the piece that keeps all of the moving parts moving together. So if you think about it in terms of the moving parts of a machine, there can be friction between parts of an engine, there can be parts that work, parts that don't work. Oil is what keeps all the parts moving over together. So information about what it is that you're meant to do, what your role is, where you fit in, all of those things are part of how an organization works well together, and particularly the pieces that are proximate to each other. And communication is the oil that lubricates the moving parts within an organization. So most organizations, and this is where the leadership piece distinguishes itself from perhaps functional communications, is there's lots of different elements to it. But the difference between leadership communication and, say, functional communication is that leadership communication is very much about the why. Now, some of you will have seen this diagram before. It's taken from Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why. But every organization has a good sense of what it does and most of how they do it. But why they do it is what is probably the piece that not every organization gets. And that's where leadership comes in. And leadership communication is very much about why. It's about identifying and clarifying for everybody involved what is the purpose of the organization, what is its culture, what are its value sets for delivering that. It's also the element that builds trust on the part of people involved in an organization. It's the element that engages people and brings them together to be engaged behind the purpose of an organization. So this is the difference between, say, leadership communication and functional communication. And when we talk about the why, the how, and the what, the why is around the purpose. The how is very much around the skills, and we're going to go on and deal with a few of those in a minute. But for me, the essential skill of leadership communications is listening. And listening is the key to opening out the opportunity to have an exchange or an engagement with people. It's the key to ultimately establishing that mutual understanding. And I would also identify leadership communication as being 4D. So what do I mean by 4D? So you're leading a group of people, a team, or you're running with a wider organization who are responding to leadership. So you're communicating down, if I could use that phrase, but you're also communicating across to peers, and you're communicating up to a board or the other members of a senior management team or chief executive. And critically, you're communicating over time. So you have to maintain a visibility over time and be consistent and persistent about communication. It's not a one-off, it is a continuous piece of ongoing activity. So that's 4D, down, up, across, and through time. And then we also look at what it is that we communicate about. And ultimately, every organization needs to have a sense of its direction. So, a thorough piece of leadership communication will include setting a horizon. So you have that thing in the distance, a vision of where you want to go, but you also give people a sense of how they're going to get there. What is the path by which they would get there? And then you give them clarity around what they need to do next. So the key piece, and we will come back to this again when we look at the crisis element as well, is that people want from their leaders a sense of what it is that they're expected to do, what tools they have to do it, what is the definition of success, and when they will know they've achieved that. So providing that certainty, that what is very important, providing a sense of how they will be able to do it, but also why they're there. So all of those things combined in leadership communication. And when combined well, they support you in bringing people to a point of success or conclusion. So I want to move on now and look at two of the key elements of effective leadership communication. Start first with the idea of the stakeholder. Now, most of you have probably come across the concept of the stakeholder in different ways. And theoretically, anybody could be a stakeholder of most organizations. But what defines the stakeholder for an individual or particular organization is clarity around what the purpose of that organization is. And one of the first jobs for any leader is to understand who the stakeholders are, but not just who they are, what are the relative importance of them? What are the priorities between them? So to do that, we would look at mapping them. And I'm just going to briefly look at two mapping techniques that you could use. Now, the first is to ask a number of questions that would establish that priority so that you could map them. So these are kind of the key questions, like what ultimately are you looking at? You're looking at how somebody who's a stakeholder in the context of a given purpose can impact on your organization or can contribute to your organization or actually are engaged with or care about your organization. And then to understand what is the nature of that relationship? What are they looking to get out of it? What are you looking to get out of it? And are they critical? Can they be replaced, or are there some other options? Now, there are two models I want to look at here. The first is a simple enough matrix. It's known in the academic world as Mendelow's matrix, but it looks at mapping people, and you see that there on the screen, against a very simple matrix of power. So the axis on the left-hand side is that idea of power. And by power, we mean, have they the power over your organization to either stop it or start it, in simple terms? So if they took a mind to do so, could they actually prevent your organization from functioning? Or could they enable it to function better? So that's what we mean by power. Or sometimes you'll see that referred to as impact. What impact can they have on your organization? And on the axis along the bottom, which is the point of interest, what interest do they have? So, and that's in practical terms, do they wake up every morning regarding you as critical to their organization or their business or their objective, whatever that might be? And clearly, anybody who is in the top right-hand quadrant, who has a high level of interest in you and who can have a great impact in you, is somebody to whom you should pay great attention. They're very important. Whereas those in the bottom left-hand corner are obviously less so. And then the others are variations on the theme. And we badge those, and at some level, the badges kind of define them. So you run from being apathetic or not that particularly concerned about the organization to stakeholders who are and should be promoters of the organization. But in communication terms, we would then attribute a particular communications method or approach to those. So for example, those who are in the top left-hand corner are people who just keep satisfied because they could have a high impact on us, but they don't particularly have an interest. So we want to keep them satisfied so that their interest doesn't become more than it should be. Whereas the people who are in the top right-hand corner are people we need to have a close, ongoing, two-way relationship with. They're people who we should never wonder what they're thinking, and neither should we leave out anything they should know about us. That typically would include staff and key customers or key customer channel owners. It depends on the nature of your business. But ultimately, we're looking to identify which amongst all our stakeholders are the ones that have the greatest priority. Now, another way of looking at it is a different model, which is called the Salience Model. And any of you who have ever done project management may have come across this because it's used quite a lot in project management, and particularly for things like infrastructure developments, etc. And ultimately, it adds another tier to this, and it uses a merging circles type Venn diagram type structure to identify it. It adds the concept of legitimacy. So what is the legitimacy of a stakeholder's relationships? We have the power idea, the impact, and we have urgency, which would be similar to the idea of interest for like stakeholders who have an urgent interest in you. But we add the concept of legitimacy. So for example, shareholders have legitimacy, regulators have legitimacy because there's some sort of legal basis for it. And maybe to put this in a slightly different way of presenting it, if you put it in these terms, if you color it in, you can see that those stakeholders who are in all of three circles and who are right in the center here, they're clearly absolutely critical. Those who are the amber are equally have different characteristics to them. And you give characteristics to the various different stakeholders. So the salience or the impact they can have on you is defined in a slightly different way. And also it factors in the existence of people who are not necessarily stakeholders, but could become interested in. That could be the general public or the public at large. So these are two different ways of just mapping your stakeholders. They're methods by which you can identify for the communication that you want to do who actually are the most important and what ought their role to be and what your interest in them should be. So I want to move on now to the idea of listening, which is, again, a critical, and as I say, for me, it's the turnkey skill set in terms of communications on the part of communications generally, but particularly on the part of leadership. Now, to look at, as I said, the science bit, listening is not the same as hearing. Listening is a much more active, specific role. And ultimately, listening is about attention. It's not about oral. And in practical terms, you actively have to decide to listen. It's not something that just happens. And therefore, it becomes the critical skill, I would argue, of communication for that reason, because it's that which allows you to understand. And it isn't just words. And probably, again, most of us will have heard this at some point in our lives. And in particular, in these days where so much of our communication is mediated, body language is a huge part of it. Tone of voice is a huge part of it, as well as the actual words. And the successful communicators are those who listen first and then communicate. I mean, there's that old saying, you're given 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. But ultimately, in context of being a leader, you have to really consciously work on the skill of listening, because you need to listen to everybody all the time in different ways. It's not, as I say, just about hearing. It's an active skill that is developed around two or three specific pieces. It's an attitude, which is if you like, a state of mind. It is the commitment to give attention, and then it's the willingness to adjust your approach to people based on what you actually take in and what you understand from them, because that demonstrates listening. So it's a choice. And broadly speaking, here are the headings that we would cover in doing that. So it's about, fundamentally, it's about looking at mutual understanding, but it's also about taking on other people's perspectives and giving them assurance that you are taking on their perspectives. And what that is, it opens out then to engage less defensiveness. It opens out to give you more opportunity to learn, more opportunity to know and to respond to. And what we need to look at is developing active behaviors that demonstrate to another person that you're a listener, because that gives them a confidence that you're there to share something with them and that you regard them as part of the solution to what you're doing, which is the essence of good leadership, because you're giving direction and you're bringing people along the path. So to look at the four headings as to what they would be, the first is that the need to actively plan to listen. So the overall component of active listening requires, first of all, that you do actually listen, which is about defining yourself as being in a space to take on board what somebody else is saying. It's actually defining yourself as being somebody who is now consciously paying attention. It is somebody who's applying analysis in your mind, because as I touched on, hearing is using your ears, it's a senses thing, whereas listening is using your brain, it's an analysis thing, it's an engagement thing. The second part of active listening is the idea of questioning. So you use questions to engage further, to find out more, to explore, to demonstrate that you have already engaged with the material, to illustrate that you're interested in the content, to illustrate that you're interested in understanding what's behind the content, and to show that you're paying attention, because your question would be related to what you've already been able to take on board. The third element of active listening is the idea of paraphrasing or repackaging, taking something and demonstrating to somebody that you actually have taken it on board by playing it back to them, and perhaps using phrases like, can I just check with you here, or what I'm hearing from you is, or it seems to me that what you're saying is. So repackaging something so you can demonstrate to somebody that you actually have taken on board what they've just said to you. And then the fourth part is at the end of an interaction is agreeing with somebody that you have actually heard and that you're both on the same page on something, that you have a mutual understanding of it, because that ultimately defines that you have listened and you have heard. So therefore, we've looked at two things under the broad heading of leadership and communications leadership: the idea of understanding the stakeholder and understanding that the stakeholders are different from each other, and the idea of actively listening so that you can better understand those stakeholders, you can better have a sense of what they're looking for. So the mapping piece is a general piece in terms of having an understanding of where your stakeholders are. The active listening is taking that into the specific situation and being able to apply it to the specifics. And there are a number of key takeaways around active communication, which I would leave here with you. But the top one here is that listening is the super skill. And ultimately, you can, if you listen and encourage input, you create an opportunity to engage better with people, to provide that direction, to illustrate why, how, and what. Now we step forward into the idea of communicating in a challenging circumstance, or a crisis, if you want to call it that. And I'm going to touch on this, and I'm going to use a frame of reference of situational crisis theory, which is an academic theory in the sense that it is derived from the academic study, and this is what we would do in coursework, but it's derived from the academic study of thousands and thousands of actual crisis situations managed all over the world. And it's identifying the key themes and the key approaches that are taken, and then rendering back that in a framework which helps you to make decisions. It helps you to narrow down the options that you might have in a crisis situation. It's the kind of thing that you would practice then in crisis training, etc. So there are four elements that, well, I'll say it's a number of elements, but they're ultimately the key at the core of this is the responsibility, defining and deciding where responsibility lies in a difficult situation or a crisis is what defines the response. So what we're looking to do is understand where the responsibility for an issue lies, and then that drives the response that you would make. That drives how you would approach it. It defines how you will manage it. It intensifies the threat that you might have, and that in turn helps you to make the decision. So there are four headings that I want to touch on here, and they'll come under two, if you like, broad actions. The first is to define what type of crisis we have. So what are the circumstances that we're in? And the second then is against that to understand what is the backdrop for the organization in question. What is its history? What is its experience? What has happened before? What is its reputation? Because that also determines. So two things, broadly speaking, determine how you should answer. One is what's happened and who's responsible for it. And two is what is the background and history of the organization. Now, the background and history of the organization and its previous experience and its strengths and weaknesses and all those things, they're things you can know at any point in time, and we'll touch on that. But developing a sense of who is responsible for what type of crisis we have, and therefore what level of responsibility it goes with it, is something that has to be kind of a little bit learned. And it's about attributing responsibility. So there are, broadly speaking, three types of crisis that exist that generally they can be grouped under, and responsibility will be different depending on each. The first, which we've all experienced in the course of the current year, is the concept of a victim crisis. So, this is something that is totally beyond our control. And in fact, if you're working for an organization, it is as much a victim of the crisis as anybody else. And the current circumstances are a good example of that, the pandemic. But it would be a natural disaster, or it would be some sort of an attack from outside. It's something over which the organization has no control, but it may create a crisis or a breach for the organization. So that's one type, where the responsibility is very, very low or non-existent. You have no responsibility for it. You are a victim for it. The second type of crisis that we can identify is what would be known as the accidental crisis. So it is something for which the organization has a role or a part, but it's not something that it was caused by anything it did intentionally. So it's an unintentional thing. It's a genuine accident which will happen. And that could be anything from, motor, air, train crash, through to some sort of product contamination, through to something that goes faulty. So it's genuine accidents that happen where there is a degree of responsibility that goes back to the organization, but it isn't intentional on their part. And then the third type of action crisis is the preventable crisis, where there is some degree of responsibility, and it may range from being very mild to being very serious, but there's a clear responsibility or some element of participation on the part of the organization. And usually these are things where there's negligence or malice or a forethought in it, and where there's some violation of regulations or best practice or legal structures or whatever. Clearly very different. And as you might quickly imagine, when you start to look at those, the reputation threat goes with the responsibility. So if you are literally part of a victim crisis, then clearly there is a relatively low tariff from a reputation threat point of view. Whereas clearly, if you are actually responsible and it's a preventable, I'm sorry, the slide got a little bit mangled up there, excuses. But if it's a preventable crisis, which should be over on the extreme right there, then clearly there's a high degree of responsibility for the crisis, and it changes the dynamic completely. So that's the first thing we have to do. We have to identify what is the actual profile or nature of the crisis. And then the second thing we look at in terms of assessing it is, what is what would intensify that? So clearly there are a number of things going to intensify the degree to which people would hold you responsible. So if you have a past history of similar incidences, so for example, if you're an organization which has had accidents before, or you've had crises of a similar nature before, then that would clearly intensify the sense to which the responsibility would create a high reputation threat. If also your reputation intent, and by that I mean if you're an organization that, for example, trades itself on being high quality, well then a breach of that is something that will work against you. Whereas if you're somebody who is known for being a value operator, for example, then clearly that would carry a different tariff because people would look at it differently. So your reputation intent relative to what has happened will intensify it. So also will your prior reputation. If you have a stellar reputation as somebody who does things properly, who plays to best practice, who has a good reputation in society and is an upright corporate citizen, then that would be different for if you're somebody who has a reputation for being perhaps shoddy or taking shortcuts or always taking the cheap option. And we can all think of, I'm not going to name names here, but we can all think of examples where the prior history of an organization would have worked against it in terms of people's willingness to accept that this was a genuine situation that happened or a genuine accident. And then, of course, there's market factors. I mean, if you're in a very competitive marketplace where there is kind of cutthroat competition, it may be that a crisis is something that is subject to the potential of being exploited by a competitor. So all of these are factors that will intensify the potential reputation tariff, or the reputation threat that exists. So defining your crisis and understanding what might intensify it is the first stage of developing your response. Then we go on to the second element of developing your response, which is that of how you actually frame the response. Now, there you go. So ultimately, the response in a crisis is very much framed by the need to accommodate. So recognizing that we have a threat, and the threat is a reputation threat that is going to get between us and our stakeholders. Ultimately, the response will be framed in the theory piece to accommodate or show concern for those that are impacted. And the greater the threat, and you can take this in a very simple terms, the greater the threat to your reputation with those people, the more you need to accommodate them. So if there's a low level of responsibility, then there's a certain type of response that's appropriate. If there's a higher level of responsibility that is attributed to you, then there needs to be a much more accommodating approach that compensates or that balances that out in the minds of your audiences. And there are a number of strategies that you can look to develop, which we will look briefly at in terms of where they would fit in and how you would respond to circumstances. So you have the option to deny, to say that this didn't happen, it was an attack, or that it was caused by somebody else. This is a strategy that you need to be very cautious about employing, because if there's clearly no responsibility, this is a plausible approach. But if there is any degree of responsibility, this becomes a very tricky approach, because you're basically leaving yourself open to interpretation. This is only a response that's safe and clear if you're the victim, if it's dealing with a victim crisis, where clearly you had no hand, act, or part in it. To diminish one is where you're trying to excuse or explain it and trying to justify things that happened, more likely to be appropriate when you're looking at an accidental situation. The idea of rebuilding is where you will be looking to take some responsibility, but you're also in a position to apologize and develop and build on, and it's about rebuilding people's belief in or acceptance of what you're offering. And reinforcing is building on that again. So it's building up and looking at others who are your partner with, perhaps in rebuilding it. To look at where to start, ultimately, in every crisis situation, the starting point, and this refers back to what I said earlier on, but what people are ultimately looking for in an organization is direction as to what to do, what you require of them, what should happen next, where that's going to lead to, how they'll be supported in doing that. And likewise, in any crisis situation, the first thing people want to know is, what should they do? Of course, they want to know what's happened, but what should they do, and how can they basically protect their situation or survive them in their situation? So to offer instruction and care is the baseline for any crisis response, over and above everything else. So this is over and above why it happened, or what will happen in the future, or anything like that. The first thing is basic instructions on how to sustain themselves in the short term, maybe get them into a situation or out of a situation as appropriate, and then some care, which includes some empathy for potential loss, or some immediate direction on corrective actions and where people can go. So that's the baseline response that should always be there in any crisis situation. And then on top of that, you build. And look, I don't expect people to read down through this one, because you will get the slides, but in very simple terms, if you're at a low level of responsibility and you've got a low reputation threat, then you can rely on the instruction and care as a basic response. If, however, you've got a very high reputation threat, because there's a high degree of responsibility, if you go down to the last point there, with strong crisis responsibility, you need to be looking at offering some sense of compensation, some sense of apology, and some sense of rebuilding, because instruction and care isn't good enough. People won't just respond to that, they will need more. So ultimately, in a crisis planning situation, a crisis response situation, you'll build up the sophistication of your response based on the degree of responsibility that is attributed to you for the crisis and the history that you have. And you will do with care, instruction and care first, and then you'll build out on that accordingly. And ultimately, the core of anything is that your compensation, or the more complicated strategies, are when there is serious harm done. But ultimately, care and instruction is the core of it. So to go back then and summarize those, the key thing in approaching any crisis situation starts from the same place as your original leadership communication. You should know your stakeholders. You should open the channels to them and have the channels open to them so that you can engage with them as quickly as possible and as openly as possible. You need to have ongoing listening. listening it should be an ongoing thing at all times. So you should know where your stakeholder is talking and where there's a conversation taking place. You don't necessarily have to be in it all the time, but you should be able to listen and monitor it so that you can immediately tap into it and understand what's happening. In a crisis situation, the first thing to do is establish the nature of the crisis. What level of responsibility attributes to you for it? And then you follow with instruct and care. What do people need to know and need to know now? And then you build up as responsibility dictates. And then you maintain regular contact at all stages. So those, broadly speaking, would be my my top line guidelines on leadership communications and dealing with communications in a crisis situation. I'm happy to take any questions that people might have.
Great. Thank you, Padraig. That was really, really insightful. And I think we were all sharing the mouse and the remote control. So that's what was happening at the beginning. We were all too eager. So I don't think, so apologies about that. Just I mean, just from the get-go, like your definition between leadership communication versus functional and the focus on the why, I think it's simple, but it's really useful. And I think it was a good reminder around the stakeholder mapping and the listening actively, and really pushing those two things has been fundamental. But I think one of the things that was quite interesting, particularly because we're thinking about COVID and we're living this real life crisis, is the definitions around victim, accidental and preventable crisis, and really looking at that axis of the reputational threat. And it's really interesting, that there is a starting point and that you can get through this and you can navigate it with a really good framework behind you. And so it's great. And I'm just interested in the options: deny, diminish, rebuild, and reinforce, and thinking about Trump and the options he normally takes. And I know you're going to be on for one day of the modules. I think it'll be an interesting discussion to use some comparisons around the world. Have you any thoughts on I mean, I don't even think it should take airtime, but am I right in saying Trump's strategy is deny?
Oh, absolutely. But it's like it's so much more complex, and it's completely unsustainable because there's just simply no evidence. But it absolutely is deny. What he's relying on is, first of all, he's playing to his base, and the challenge there is that I would argue if he wanted to be successful as a politician, you need to map all your stakeholders, not just the ones that suit you. And the difficulty here is that he's not creating any grounds. The challenge he has is he hasn't actually created any common ground or common understanding with people who are in the, if you take it that in US politics, somewhere between 40 and 45% of the population are sewn up in terms of their views. They're not going to swing anyway. So you're really playing for 6 to 8% of the entire population that in any given point in time are going to come to the election and vote. But if you look at that kind of mapping exercise, he's done nothing to build mutual understanding at all with parties other than his base. So yes, he knows who the stakeholders who are in that top right-hand corner. So he knows the stakeholders who like him are, but he hasn't actually looked at the people who could vote for him who are not currently in that space and not really create anything to appeal to them. And the interesting analysis would be that when somebody comes along who is capable of doing that and who is capable of actually capturing that middle ground in a sustainable way, then that person will likely hoover up those votes. And there is absolutely a position there for some period of time. I mean, demographics are changing too, but there is for a period of time, there is definitely an opportunity for a strong man, to use that phrase, to come in and build on what Trump has done. But it would be somebody who is more competent as a political operator, and therefore will be able to capture people between 50 and 55 who are currently going to, I don't mean 50 and 55, 50, the whatever that is, the 11th decile, the people between the 50th and the 55th percentage of, and then will swing to his, and he give him the 54, 55% that he doesn't currently have. But his problem is that he hasn't actually he hasn't really analyzed the stakeholders to the election. He's just played to his base.
Yeah, it just shows the importance of strategic analysis of your stakeholders, and I think that's a lesson for leaders and organizations as well. We just have a couple of questions coming in through chat, Padraig, if you don't mind. One from there saying, look, you've given us lots of brilliant information, but what is the very, very first starting point that you can identify for us?
I think, well, the first thing is to identify the nature. I mean, it is to identify the nature of the crisis, to understand what impact your crisis is going to have on your key stakeholders. So, I mean, it does presume that you understand and know who your stakeholders are. I'll give an example. I was involved, it's nearly 20 years ago now, so it's very much, sorry, it's more than 20 years ago. It was an accident down in Dublin Port, and there was unfortunately a fatal accident where a pleasure craft had drifted across the pathway of a commercial cargo vessel, and the port was closed. It had to be closed. Now, they immediately kicked in an operation where the first people that were going to be impacted were their customers, and by customers I mean the ferry lines. And it was a Sunday morning, which is actually very busy in port terms, because while the rest of the country is sleeping off Saturday night or playing football or going to visit their granny, the port is very busy because materials are coming in to be in factories and in shops on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday. So there's actually more activity in the port than there might be anywhere else in society. So their first cohort of people, the people most affected, and where there was going to be a knock-on effect, were either ferry vessels coming in with people on them or commercial vessels coming in with goods and services on them, who were going to immediately be impacted by this. So they engaged with those people first. They understood who their key stakeholders were. So the first thing to do is to understand who is going to be affected by this. Know who matters to your organization. So if you're looking at saying, well, I'm here today, and what if I had a crisis this evening? Well, do you know who matters to your organization? Do you know? It's less about what has happened and more about the effect of it. So the effect of it is denial of supply, or denial of input, or denial of service, or inability to service certain customers. So understand as quickly as possible what the impact is, because then you can determine what actions you need to take. If you can't figure out the impact, and usually the impact boils down to a small number of things, there may be a large number of things which could cause a denial of service, but a denial of service is denial of service. So if you look at the moving parts of your organization and understand what the impacts could be and have a knowledge of those, then the first thing you do in a crisis situation is saying, what impact on those outcomes is this crisis having? Because that's where I need to go first. In the case of the port, it basically was not able to service anybody coming or going. So it had to talk to those people first, before it talked to the media, before it talked to regulators, before it talked to anybody else.
Yeah, and it gives you that sequence of contact, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
And that's your communication, which is very useful. I'm just conscious of the time, so we've just one more question from Aoife in our audience, who said, and if you can keep it short, that would be great, Padraig. So what does a leader do to maintain momentum and engagement in an organization that has poor reputation management? So, how do you keep the people motivated in that scenario?
Well, I mean, ultimately, listen to people. I know I said it before, but it is listen to people. I mean, there's never a bad time to start. You may have a poor reputation, but you can always put a line behind it by saying, look, I know I've got things wrong in the past, but we need to do the following. And it does start with listening. I'm involved in something at the moment. It's, I suppose, a negotiation of types. It's an issue rather than a crisis. But the big challenge at the moment is that one side does not appear to be understanding the other. And it's not that they haven't had lots of material presented to them. So demonstrating that you're listening to somebody and giving a little bit of feedback that demonstrates that you're listening, that makes me want to come back. Whereas if you're giving me the feedback or the feeling that you're not listening to me, you're not really taking on board what I'm saying, then my capacity to engage with you is being reduced. So I think the key thing is with your key stakeholders and with the people impacted, demonstrate that you're genuinely listening and that you're taking on board what they're doing. You may not be able to do everything about it, but if you can explain why you can't do everything about it, you're at least demonstrating that you're listening and you understand. So I would say demonstrating to somebody that you're paying attention and you're listening to what they're saying is the first step in getting them to work with you.
And it's kind of an interesting dilemma in terms of that question. It's like chicken and egg. So if your organization has poor reputation management, I suspect they're not listening as an organization, but you as a manager has to listen maybe to your own people to try and, sustain some type of motivation. Yeah. So
again, if you understand who your stakeholders are, internal and external, and you have a sense of priority between them, and you're listening, even if you can't listen to everybody, if at least taking that as a guide to say, well, where do I need to listen most? You can build from there. You can't just blast something out from at all. You can't broadcast stuff and expect people to buy into it if you haven't invested a little bit in that listening piece and understanding who you need to listen to most. And it serves you well on long term.
And Padraig, thank you so much. That was really useful and insightful. And just to say, as we've already said, Padraig will be one of the facilitators and tutors on the programme. And just to show you, like Padraig's session obviously will be longer, it'll be much more interactive in a normal virtual world, but also it will be accompanied by an afternoon session of a simulation, a crisis management simulation. So that's the nature of the programme, and Owen is going to take us through a little bit more detail of that. So Padraig, thank you so much, and I'm going to just hand over to Owen now. Over to you, Owen. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Nicola, and thanks, Padraig. So what I'm going to do just for the last few minutes of this session is take you through some of the detail of the programme. So firstly, I'm just going to come back to the partnership between DCU and Harvest. So Nicola introduced Harvest briefly at the start, but we're very excited to be a partner to them. Harvest is Ireland's leading people development consultancy. They've over 35 years experience in people development, bespoke learning solutions, organisation development, executive coaching, mentoring and digital learning. So Harvest have a fantastic team of highly qualified and experienced learning experts, and they have a fantastic track record of partnering with global brands in the area of leadership development, making them a leader in their field. Here in DCU Business School, we equally have a long history of executive education, education training, both to client organizations and companies that we work with, and also obviously to individuals. That's through our accredited programming, but also we do executive education non-accredited programming. So what we're doing in DCU Business School is making sure that our programs are crafted to meet the needs of both the business and the individuals developing their careers based on the industry connections that underpin our approach to education. The DCU Business School is globally accredited by AACSB and AMBA, which means we're in the top 5% of business schools globally. So to give you a sense of, with that partnership then in mind, to give you a sense of who we're targeting for this program. So a typical participant could be a head of a function, a head of a department in a larger organization. Equally, if you're in a small to medium sized organization, you might be part of the leadership team or in the C-suite there. In whatever type of organization that you're in, you could be a successor or with ambitions to get that C level of leadership. Or equally, depending on your company structure, you could have significant strategic responsibilities. So if you or any of your colleagues are any of the above, I think you should be very interested in this program. So again, it's designed for leaders seeking a global and up-to-date perspective on leadership, and particularly on how to lead in an ongoing VUCA context. So our expert delivery team, we're very excited. I guess one of the upsides of the partnership between Harvest and ourselves is bringing together the talent from both teams. So I guess how that manifests itself then is that the program itself, through the expertise of our team, will be bringing you the most up-to-date research-based content, and equally experiential sessions, which means that there should be and there will be an ease of application and implementation of the knowledge that you get and the skills acquired. And you can see there on the program page just a sample of some of the people that you'll be meeting on the program. So to give you a sense of an overview of the program, we've divided the program into 5 module areas, as you can see here on this slide. So through these thematic module areas, we'll be taking participants through a rich learning experience of what we think will be important, relevant, and practical areas that will develop and enhance the career potential of all of the program participants. So you can see there, we'll be starting off with a module on leadership, self-analysis, resilience, and agility. After that, we'll be moving on to leadership and leading a mission control leadership team. Module 3 is about imagining a new world. Module 4, that you got a taster of today with Padraig, is about critical communications. And at the end then, we'll be going into a crisis simulation and leadership response module. So the next slide gives you a finer layer of granularity and detail as to what that actually looks like. So firstly, in terms of the program structure, The program, as I said, it's divided into 5 modules, but that's divided then into 10 programmatic days. The program days will run every 4 weeks, and at the end, the final 2 days will be joined back to back as consecutive days. Each day will run from 9:30 in the morning, and it will conclude at 4:30 p.m. And I'll give you a glimpse in the next slide about what the structure of the day looks like. So what you're going to get over the 10-month duration of the program, overall, each participant will receive a personalized insights discovery profile report and an EQ profile. Secondly, you'll get 2 peer learning sessions. There's 9 masterclass days, including an innovation challenge and also a crisis simulation that we've mentioned a couple of times. And equally, for anybody interested individually or for their organizations, there's optional one-to-one coaching packages available as well on the side of this program. So what will you learn on the back of all of this? Firstly, it will be about identifying what it takes to become a leader comfortable in VUCA times with skill sets to be effective. Next, it's about effectively leading a mission control leadership team. Thirdly, it's about enhancing messaging and developing stakeholder-centric communication skills for uncertain times. And lastly, it's about imagining a new world of possibilities for the leader and your organization. And as you can see then, the module days, some of the themes I've outlined at a higher level, but everything from leadership and personal resilience, personal leadership agility to transformation trends in global business, leadership communications in times of uncertainty, design thinking and innovation. There's a lot of great stuff packed into the program. In terms of the delivery structure, so on the right-hand side, you will see a typical schedule for the day. So essentially what that boils down to is that in the morning setup will be starting at 9:30 a.m. And we will do live virtual masterclasses for 2 to 2.5 hours. So I guess that also points out that this is an online learning program, and it's online learning given the current circumstances that we're in and our adherence to ongoing public health regulations. And we're very confident that while being online, we're taking a rich experience of online delivery between Harvest and DCU, and we'll be bringing that into the whole mix for the learner experience. So the morning sessions are around virtual masterclasses. They're the academic research-led learning sessions. And then generally in the afternoon in our virtual classroom, again for 2 or 2.5 hours, it's going to be more focused on the experiential application of the course contents. And that will include, as you can see there from the wheel diagram, everything from discussion, collaborative group work. We'll also be bringing in each of the sessions, there'll be readings and cases, pre and post. There'll be social learning, so group discussion forum within your team and coaching groups. Action learning, and as mentioned, there's also personality profile in the form of the Insights Discovery Report and the EQ report that everybody will get as well. So what does that look like on a scheduled basis? On the left-hand side there, you can see the program dates. So again, it's 10 days of a program delivered online over 10 months. It's mostly Wednesdays, apart from the last 2 days of the programs, which are organized to go back to back. And then for further information, you can download a brochure or visit the program detail on either the Harvest or the DCU Business School website. So lastly, we would like to give you another taster of the what's going to be on the program. So we will have another live webinar next month. So at the same time in 3 weeks' time at 11 o'clock on Thursday, the 3rd of December. So Dr. John McMacken from DCU Business School will be covering a webinar around one of his current areas of expertise around personal and organizational agility. I've seen John deliver some webinars on this recently. It's fascinating. It's a growing space, and I would encourage you all to come back and take a glimpse of that. And that's also one of the sessions that features on the program. So with that, I'd like to thank you on behalf of myself, Nicola and Padraig, and thank you very much for your time today. And we hope to see you again in 3 weeks' time for the next session.